I didn't say a word when my brother called to tell me what he'd done. I just sat there in my car in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Burnaby, engine still running, listening to him explain, casually, like he was reading off a grocery list, that he had moved his girlfriend into my rental unit, the unit I owned. The one I'd spent 4 years saving for, 3 months renovating, and $1,200 on a new washer-dryer set that still had the plastic wrap on the drum. She needed a place, he said. You weren't using it. I wasn't using it. As if a furnished, legally registered rental property was the same as a parking spot you leave empty on a Tuesday. I said, okay. And I hung up. My brother is 31. He has never held the same job for longer than 8 months. He has borrowed money from me 6 times. I know the exact number because I have a note in my phone, not out of resentment, but because I learned early that my memory and his memory of events tend to diverge significantly. He is charming in the way that certain people are charming, the kind that makes you feel chosen when he decides to like you, and small when he doesn't. Our parents think he's brilliant. They've thought that since he was 7 years old and won a regional spelling bee, and nothing that has happened in the 24 years since has updated that opinion. I am 32. I work in commercial property management. I understand leases, security deposits, and tenant rights better than most people understand their own names. I bought the condo unit in New Westminster when the market dipped slightly in late 2022, a 1-bedroom, 2nd floor, with a balcony that gets afternoon light and a building that allows long-term rentals. I had a tenant in there, a quiet woman who worked at the hospital, and she gave me 2 months' notice when she got a transfer to Halifax. I thanked her, wished her well, and began looking for her replacement. My brother found out the unit was vacant because I made the mistake of mentioning it at my parents' dinner table in Surrey one Sunday in March. That was mistake number 1. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I did not, at any point during those first few minutes in the Home Depot parking lot, feel surprise. Anger, yes, that particular cold, settling kind of anger that doesn't make your hands shake but makes everything slightly too quiet. But not surprise. If you have spent your life watching someone take things that weren't theirs and be praised for his resourcefulness, you stop being surprised. You just start keeping better records. What my brother had done specifically was this. He had gone to my parents, told them that his girlfriend, I'll call her his girlfriend throughout this because that is what she was, and I think the clarity matters, was in a difficult situation. She'd had a falling out with her previous roommates. She needed somewhere to stay urgently. He had presented this to my parents as a crisis, which it was not, and my mother had told him that surely I wouldn't mind, just temporarily, just until she found something, and my father had nodded because he always nods when my mother speaks. And between the 3 of them, they had decided that the right move was to give her my key, which my brother had a copy of, which I had given him 2 years ago when I'd asked him to let in a plumber and had stupidly not asked for it back. She moved in on a Wednesday. She had been living in my unit for 11 days before he called to let me know. I drove home, I made tea, I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was look up the Residential Tenancy Act of British Columbia, which I already knew by heart, but looked up again anyway, the way you check your pockets for your keys, even when you know you have them. Under BC tenancy law, once a person has occupied a rental unit with the landlord's tacit or express permission, or, crucially, without explicit objection within a reasonable period, the situation becomes legally complicated. 11 days is 11 days. I needed to move carefully. The second thing I did was pull up the BC Residential Tenancy Branch website and review the process for serving a notice to end tenancy for unauthorized occupancy. It requires specific documentation, specific timelines, and cannot simply be resolved by changing the locks, which is what every instinct in my body was telling me to do. The third thing I did was call my friend who is a paralegal and who has known me since university and who, when I explained the situation, said, "Oh, your brother is an absolute piece of work," with a kind of weary admiration. She helped me draft a formal letter. Not aggressive, clinical. Addressed to my brother, carbon copy to his girlfriend, stating clearly that no tenancy agreement existed, no permission had been granted, and that occupancy must cease within 14 days, or I would pursue formal eviction proceedings through the RTB. I sent it by email and followed up with a hard copy sent to the unit via registered mail. Then I waited. My brother called the next morning. He was not reading from a grocery list this time. "You're going to make her homeless," he said. "She has nowhere to go." "Do you understand what you're doing?" I said. "I understand exactly what I'm doing. Mom is devastated. I imagine she'll recover." "This is family," he said, and his voice had shifted into the register he uses when he wants you to feel that you are failing some fundamental human test. "Family helps each other." I said, "You used a key I gave you for an emergency to move someone into my property without my knowledge or consent. That's not family helping each other. That's trespassing." He called me cold. He called me legalistic. He used the word corporate like it was an insult. Then he told me that if I went through with this, he would never forgive me, which was interesting because I could not identify a single thing he had ever forgiven me for to begin with. I said, 14 days, and I hung up. My parents called that evening. My mother first, then my father, then my mother again. My mother's call lasted 40 minutes and covered, in no particular order, my childhood, my grandmother who had passed 4 years ago and who she invoked as though my grandmother would have wanted me to allow unauthorized occupants in my investment property. The concept of sisterhood, even though I have no sisters, the difficulty of my brother's life, which is mostly a difficulty of his own construction, and her personal sense of failure as a mother. I listened to all of it. I did not change my position. My father's call was shorter. He asked me if I understood that my brother was trying. I said I understood that word could mean many things. He sighed in the way he always sighs, like the air in his lungs is heavier than it should be, and said he hoped I would think about what really mattered. I told him I was thinking about it constantly. I had been. Here is what I understood about my situation. If I engaged emotionally, I would lose. Not legally. I was on solid ground, but in the family court of public opinion, I would be the villain. I had watched this happen before, smaller stakes but the same structure. My brother makes a mess. I object. My brother makes me the story. Suddenly, it's not about what he did, it's about how I responded to what he did, and isn't my response a little extreme, a little cold, a little corporate? The only way to win that particular game is not to play it. So I stopped taking my parents' calls. Not forever, not dramatically. I just let them go to voicemail and responded by text with brief, neutral updates. "I'm handling it. I'll keep you posted. I love you." Conversation over. And then I let the 14 days run. His girlfriend did not leave. I did not expect her to. I filed with the Residential Tenancy Branch for dispute resolution and a possession order. This is not a fast process. It is a deliberate, documented, bureaucratic process, and I let it be exactly that. What I did not let be slow was everything else. I had my brother's spare key disabled. I had the building's property manager rekey the unit on the basis of a security concern, which was true since someone had accessed my property without authorization. New keys were issued to me only, and I notified his girlfriend in writing that as an unauthorized occupant, she would not be issued building access credentials. I documented everything. Every text message from my brother, every voicemail from my parents, every piece of correspondence I sent and received. I kept a log with dates and times. My paralegal friend helped me organize it into something that would be useful if things escalated. They escalated. About 3 weeks in, my brother showed up at my apartment where I live in Coquitlam, unannounced, on a Saturday morning. He was not alone. He had brought our mother. I saw them on the intercom camera and I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition. He was deploying a tactic. He had brought her because he knew I would find it harder to shut the door in her face. He was right. I buzzed them up. My mother was dressed like she was coming from church, which she was not, because it was Saturday, which meant she had gotten dressed deliberately, which meant this was orchestrated. She sat down in my living room and immediately began to cry, very quietly the way she has always cried, which I have spent my entire life finding impossible to be unmoved by. My brother laid out a proposal. His girlfriend would pay rent. Reduced rent, below market rate, but something. She would sign, he used the word sign, which I noticed, some kind of informal agreement. They would make it right. Didn't I see that this could work out for everyone? I asked what rent he was proposing. He said $1,400. My unit rents for $2,250. The previous tenant paid $2,250. The building's average for a one-bedroom is over $2,000. $1,400 is not a rate. It's an insult wearing the costume of a compromise. I said, no. My brother looked at me. My mother looked at me. There was a long silence of the kind that is meant to feel like an accusation. I said, I understand you're frustrated. I understand this feels unfair from where you're standing. But I didn't create this situation, and I'm not going to resolve it in a way that costs me money and gives someone who trespassed on my property a below-market rental by default. That's not going to happen. My mother said. She has nowhere to go. I said, that is not my responsibility. My brother stood up. He said I was going to regret this. He said a lot of things after that, but that one was the one that landed. Not because I was afraid of it, but because I recognized the shape of it. That sentence, "You're going to regret this," is what people say when they are planning to make you regret it. It's not a prediction. It's a notice of intent. He left. My mother followed him, still crying, her coat buttoned wrong. I sat in my living room for a while after they left. I made a second cup of tea. I opened my laptop, and then I got to work on the part I hadn't told anyone about yet. Several weeks earlier, before the 14 days had even expired, I had made a quiet phone call to a woman I know slightly through the property management industry. She is a landlord with 6 units across the Lower Mainland, and she is occasionally willing to help colleagues in exchange for reciprocal goodwill. I had told her my situation. She had listened. Then she'd said, "I might have something for your actual tenant search once this is cleared up. But in the meantime, have you done a full property inspection?" I had not, because I hadn't been in the unit since I rekeyed it. I scheduled a formal landlord entry. BC law requires 24 hours written notice for a non-emergency inspection, which I provided, and I walked through my unit for the first time in 5 weeks. The washer-dryer still had the plastic wrap on the drum. The rest of the unit was not in the condition I'd left it. Nothing criminal, nothing catastrophic, but a broken blind in the bedroom, a burn mark on the counter I did not put there, a scuff along the hallway wall that looked like furniture had been moved in badly. And this was the one that made me stand in the kitchen for a very still moment. My building's guest parking had been designated to the unit, and a parking permit I had issued to my previous tenant was now sitting in a different car's windshield entirely. In someone else's vehicle. A vehicle registered, I would later determine, to his girlfriend's brother. I photographed everything. 61 photographs. I filed an updated dispute form with the RTB. The RTB hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, conducted by video conference, which is how most of them run now. My brother did not appear. His girlfriend appeared, represented by herself, visibly unprepared. She had not filed a counter-application. She had not submitted evidence. She had, as best I could determine, been told by my brother that this was going to resolve itself, that families work these things out, that I would back down. I did not back down. The arbitrator granted the possession order. His girlfriend had 15 days to vacate. I want to describe what happened next carefully, because it is the part that I think matters most, and I don't want to overstate it. My brother had spent 6 weeks telling everyone in our family, extended family, I mean aunts and cousins who had been texted and group chatted into this narrative, that I was cruel, that I was legalistic, that I was punishing his girlfriend for his mistake, that I had always resented him, that I had always been cold. He had constructed an entire architecture of grievance with himself at the center of it and me as the villain. And then the RTB order came through and his girlfriend vacated and I rented the unit through a proper listing with a proper application process, credit check, references, everything, to a couple in their late 20s, both working in tech, no pets, excellent rental history. They moved in 6 days after the possession order took effect. They have been model tenants. My brother expected a confrontation. He expected me to be angry in the way he could use loud, reactive, something he could point to and say, see how she is. What he got instead was process, documentation, a hearing he didn't bother attending, an arbitrator's order he had no standing to appeal, a fait accompli. The quiet possession strategy, that's what my paralegal friends started calling it, and it stuck. You don't argue with someone who has decided you're the villain. You document. You file. You follow the process exactly as it exists. You let the system do what the system is designed to do, and you say almost nothing, because almost nothing is the thing they can't write a story around, but there is a last part, and it is the part that I have turned over in my mind most often since. About 2 months after the possession order, my brother called me again. Not about the unit. About money. He needed help. $1,200. His girlfriend had moved somewhere else. He didn't say where, and I didn't ask. And he was behind on his own rent, and could I just this once, just a loan, he would pay it back. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. Not triumph. Something smaller and sadder than that. Because the truth about my brother is that he is not calculating in the way that a villain in a story is calculating. He is just someone who has never had to reckon with consequences. Not really, not in any sustained way, and so he moves through the world assuming that things will resolve, that people will soften, that the next phone call will land differently than the last one. I said, I can't do that. He said, why not? I said, because the last time I extended trust to you in a financial context, it cost me 2 months of carrying costs on a unit I couldn't rent, legal filing fees, and 61 photographs of damage I then had to document for an RTB dispute. I don't think either of us wants to repeat that. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, you kept count. I said, I keep records, it's not the same thing. He hung up. My mother called 2 days later and asked if we could have dinner. Not to discuss anything specific, she said. Just dinner. I said yes, and we did, and we ate butter chicken that she'd made from scratch the way she always does, and we talked about her garden and a show she'd been watching, and my cousin's new baby, and neither of us mentioned my brother once. Because sometimes that is how you love someone. You eat dinner with them, and you let the hard things be hard, and you don't perform a resolution that isn't ready yet. My rental unit is currently occupied by 2 people who pay on time, every month. The first of the month, like clockwork. My spare key is in a lockbox that only I have the combination to. My brother and I have not spoken since that last phone call. I don't know if we will. I'm not performing forgiveness. I don't have yet, and I'm not performing anger. I've already mostly let go of. I'm just a woman who owns a condo in New Westminster, who understands the Residential Tenancy Act of British Columbia fairly well, who keeps very careful records. You wanted the space. You own the consequences. I've thought about this whole thing a lot since it ended. Not obsessively. I'm not someone who replays arguments in the shower looking for the perfect comeback. But I do think about it in the quiet way you think about something that taught you something real. Something that cost you a little to learn. What my brother did wasn't complicated. He saw something that wasn't his, decided it should be available to him, and moved forward on that assumption because, in his experience, assumptions like that tend to work out. Not because he's a bad person at his core, I genuinely don't believe that, but because nobody had ever said of a situation where his assumptions failed him in a way he couldn't charm or deflect his way out of. He'd always had an exit. A soft landing. Someone, usually me or my parents, absorbing the impact so he didn't have to feel it. The thing about never feeling impact is that you stop being able to accurately calculate risk. You start to believe that the world is more forgiving than it actually is, and that people, specifically the people who love you, are more elastic than they actually are. I was elastic for a long time. I lent money and didn't push when it wasn't returned. I gave a key for a plumber and didn't ask for it back. I mentioned at dinner that my unit was vacant, and I didn't clock the way he went quiet for a moment before changing the subject. Small elasticities. Small surrenders. What I learned, not from a book, not from anyone's advice, but from 61 photographs and a video conference with an RTB arbitrator on a Thursday morning, is that integrity is not about being rigid or cold or corporate, which is what my brother called me and probably still believes. Integrity is about being consistent. It's about doing what you said you would do, following through on what you committed to, and not renegotiating your own standards under emotional pressure. That is not coldness. That is the only way any of this works. The quiet possession strategy, as my paralegal friend named it, was not revenge. I want to be clear about that. I took no pleasure in the RTB hearing. I didn't want my brother humiliated. I wanted my property back, and I wanted it back through a process that was documented and clean and unimpeachable, because I understood that any drama I introduced would become the story, and the story would become the reason I was wrong. Intelligence in situations like this is not about being the loudest or the cleverest or even the most legally prepared. It's about understanding the landscape clearly enough to know which moves cost you something and which moves pay. Engaging emotionally would have cost me. Documenting everything paid, showing up to the hearing paid. Saying 14 days and meaning it, that paid. And resilience, real resilience, not the Instagram kind, is quieter than it sounds. It's sitting in a parking lot in Burnaby with the engine running, hearing something that makes you want to scream, and instead saying, okay, because you already know what you're going to do next. It's letting your mother cry in your living room without changing your position. It's answering the phone when she calls 2 months later to ask about dinner and going and eating butter chicken and letting the hard things be hard without forcing them into resolution before they're ready. My unit is rented. My records are clean. My spare key is in a lockbox. Whatever comes next between me and my brother, I genuinely don't know. But I know this, I didn't become someone I'm ashamed of to get here. And that, more than the possession order, more than the new tenants, more than any of it, is the thing I'd do again.